It was not, is not. Okay. In the previous mimer, we discussed the concept of the world of Atzilus as a mamutza. And what that meant was that the world of Atzilus has some aspects of what comes before Atzilus and some aspects of what comes after Atzilus, and therefore Atzilus is a mamutza, which answers the questions that he asked originally in the Pasuk, Oita Oyer Kasalma. There's two inyonim in Olam Atzilus, the inyan of Oyer and the inyan of Salma. In other words, the inyan of Oyeros and the inyan of keilim. And that's why Atzilus can be a mamutza. So, because Atzilus can be a mamutza, therefore it's able to bring, Atzilus is able to connect what's L'mayla mi Atzilus with the Olam HaTachtonim, with the world down below. Olam HaTachtonim. Okay. Having said that, we're now about to start this mimer. Now, what we're going to do, I'm going to try and finish almost 2 prokim. This is a 3-perek mimer, this one coming up. But I'd like to try and finish it next week because I'm going to go and be going away for a little bit, and to take a break in the middle of a mimer is not such a good idea. So let's try and finish it. And it begins as follows. Let me just share my screen here. What we're going to do is actually we're going to look at the first perek, and then there's a section in the second perek which is like a Maimar Amuzgar, sort of a by the way, an aside. And we won't learn that this week, we'll learn that next week, and then we'll be able to finish. So let's just go for it. Okay, Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Ahar. Bnei Israel encamped there opposite the mountain, opposite Har Sinai. This was the time, obviously, just before Matan Torah. And as a preparation for Matan Torah, this was a very important chanaya, a very important encampment. Why? Rashi points out, Pirush Rashi, Ki ish echad b'lev echad, like one person with one heart, like a single person with one heart. In other words, with one kavona. Like a single person with a very singular-minded kavona. So the Rebbe Rashab asked the question: what's the meaning of ki ish echad? Why does he ask this question? First of all, let me just explain grammatically why it says this. If you go into the pasuk, if you have a look in the pasuk over here. So the pasuk says, here we are. They encamped in the midbar. Encamped vayachanu in the plural. They encamped. Bnei Israel encamped. Vayichan sham Yisrael neged ahar, and Bnei Israel camped, but in the singular. Vayichan. So since it says in the singular, so the Mefarshim all jump on this in the middle of the same pasuk. It just said Vayachanu, it says Vayisu in the plural, Vayavoyu in the plural, Vayachanu in the plural, all of a sudden Vayichan. So that arouses the Mefarshim's interest, obviously. And that's why they say Balei Bechad. As we see in the Medrash, for example, and there's several Midrashim like this. I just happened to choose this one because it's a little bit easier. Vayichan Sham Yisrael, Shamin Kulam Balei Bechad. They all had one intention, one lev. Shekol vayisu vayachanu noizim machloikes v'choinim machloikes. They traveled with arguments and fights and disagreements, and they encamped with disagreements and so on and so forth. But now everyone had one heart. In other words, one intention. So the Rebbe Rasham asked the question: why does Rashi add to the Midrashim? Seemingly, this Rashi does not seem to have any other source where he says K'ish echad b'leiv echad. Why K'ish echad? What does the K'ish echad mean? B'leiv echad. B'leiv echad would mean l'chayra, like the Midrashim said, that there's many different Yidden over there, 600,000 men alone, just the men 600,000, between the ages of 20 and 60. And that would be if they would all be harmonized and harmonious in their intention to be Kabbalah the Torah and so on and so forth. That would be a fine example of B'lei V'chad. They all had the same intention to Makabel Torah and Makabel in the best possible way and so on. Why does Rashi add the words Ki'ish Echad? This is what the Rebbe Rasha wants to know. What's the inyan Tzarich Lahavin? Ma'u inyan Ki'ish Echad? What is Rashi trying to tell us over here by adding Ki'ish Echad that doesn't seem to come from any other source? B'lei V'chad, yeah, but not Ki'ish Echad. Okay, he'll explain. What was necessary by Matan Torah at the time of Matan Torah that we would have the inyan of Ki'ish Echad. Why was that necessary at the time of Matan Torah that it should be Ki'ish Echad? In order to be able to explain that, we have to preface what we explained before. Manshin is Bar El. The Atzilus, that what we said before is the Atzilus Umemutza ben Orein Sof Ha'Atzil El Anivroim. That the world of Atzilus is a mamutza. It's an in-between. It's an in-between madrega that connects. It's a connector between what precedes Olam Atzilus, i.e., the Orein Sof, and the Nivroim, and the created worlds. So Orein Sof and created worlds are connected through Olam Atzilus. Now, we said before, and explained it in great detail, V'hamamutza kalu v'shnei madregas. This mamutza has two levels. Has two inyonim. We have the oiros and the keilim, the lights and the vessels of the 10 spheroids of the world of Atzilus. You have lights and vessels. The keilim it's the vessels that are the nivra aspect of the mamutza, the nivroim aspect. And that's bebechinas metzius davar. They exist in actual existence, not like the oiros, which are l'mayla metzius. And that's bebechinas gvul. Yeah, the keilim are the aspect of gvul of the spheroids, and the limitation and the ad poi v'tuloi. This is how far it will go, and no further. And this is the type of oir, and so on and so forth. Whereas the oiros are blimahus. I don't have any particular quality to them. The chitonis or does has such a quality, but the pnimius or certainly doesn't. The pnimius or is or portion. Okay, that's what we learned previously. Okay, so we begin with Perek Tes. Yuvan, according to this that we just understood, Yuvan, the Masha Atzilus hu ba'en aroch l'gabi orein sof baruch hu. When you say that Atzilus ba'en aroch, what do we mean that Atzilus is ba'en aroch? That Atzilus is incomparable to the Orein Sof Baruch Hu? What we mean is that the keilim of b'chinas ein aroch. The oiros are not b'chinas ein aroch, right? Not only are the keilim b'chinas ein aroch, but the keilim are, in a sense, legabe their makor in comparison to their source. They b'chinas yesh mi'ayin, as we will see. So what's the inner bain aroch? Hainu b'chinas hakelim, she'en b'chinas gvul, she'eino aroch l'gabe orein sof. That this is not the inyan of it's the inyan of bain aroch to orein sof, because bain aroch is there's a difference between the orein sof and the keilim to such an extent that you can't measure them in the same scale. It's not that the keilim came about by way of a reduction of oir. The keilim came about in a way of ischachus, in a way of something new. It came about yesh mi'ayin, an union of something new that happened altogether. It had to come about by way of tzimtzum, and not by way of simply a reduction of the oir, but the union of siluka oir in order to make the keilim, as he will explain. The hisavus of these keilim came about through tzimtzum. In other words, not through tzimtzum in the sense of reduction, but tzimtzum in the sense of siluk. There was a siluka or. The or that was before the tzimtzum was mistalik, and now a new or was brought down, the or hakav, and the keilim were actually made from the, as we'll see shortly, from the hakor of the kav and the reshimo. Siluk was not heder. It is. All right, whatever. We'll get to it later. The Hainu al Yadei Heder HaOr Kanal. There was a header of or. How was there a header of or? It's not that the or was reduced. The or was nistalik. Otherwise, now where it's true that when we say that the or was nistalik, it really wasn't nistalik in the sense of kipshutoi, that it was mamish removed completely. But that is the loshon of the Arizal, silek as or elat stadim. He removed the oil. What does it mean that it was removed? It means it was removed to a madrega where it was not begiloi as or anymore, and therefore that's called siluk. Oifen shel siluk. Okay, so that's header and siluk is the same thing, but it would be easier if you put in the messages to everyone in the meeting. Otherwise, no one knows what your question is. So just make them to everyone and not privately. Okay, the Hainu the header or canal. Hare the Oifen is avusan hu b'derech ein aroch. Therefore, the keilim come about in a way of ein aroch. They're ein aroch to the or ein sof. V'hainu b'chinas richuk. Now, when he says richuk, don't make a mistake that richuk means just a long distance away, like Ishtalshalus, the top of the chain of Ishtalshalus is very far from the bottom of the chain of Ishtalshalus. That's also richuk, but that's not the kind of richuk we're talking about. We're talking about a richuk of erech. Richuk not of a reduction of the, or that's a tiny little bit, or this is $1 and that's $1 million. No, that's not what we mean over here. We don't mean it's the same thing but less of it. We mean it is a different thing altogether. Right? Begin is richuk ha'erech, not richuk ha'ishtalshalus. Okay. Again, the hari oifen is avusan hu b'derech ein aroch. Hainu begin is richuk. Richuk in the second sense, not in the ishtalshalus sense. Kamo kain. Similarly, his avusan, or in addition, his avusan mishoshan miharashimu. The shortish of the keilim is in the reshimo. What's the reshimo? The reshimo is the koach ha'gvul in the or ein sof before the tzimtzum. This koach ha'gvul doesn't mean that it was bebechinas gvul. It's a koach lahagbil. It's a koach to be able to initiate gvul, to bring gvul into reality. That's what the reshimo is. But in order for that to happen, so the or has to be instalik before the reshimo can be revealed. The koach ha'gvul is not revealed when the koach ha'bli gvul is revealed. So in order for the koach ha'gvul to be revealed, the koach ha'bli gvul has to be concealed, which is the inyan of the tzimtzum ha'or ein sof. And then the koach ha'gvul, the reshimo, comes into play in the halal. Okay, so explains. So, Yisavus Mashoshem ha'reshimo hu b'derech ein aroch. And the keilim also created in an oifen of ein aroch, meaning to say, Ein aroch from the reshimo, even not only ein aroch legabe the or, but ein aroch from the reshimo. Why? Shehare reshimo b'chinas koach ne'elam, because the reshimo itself is a koach ne'elam. What does it mean? A koach ne'elam. In order for the koach reshimo, in order for the koach ha'gvul to be revealed, it has to come about in a way of helem ha'or. He's going to explain. This is the difference between the kav and the reshimo. What's the inyan of the kav? The inyan of the kav is that it's a line of light. It's a kav of oil which goes all the way back to the or ein sof. The mashenka and the reshimo is not connected to the or ein sof per se. Adrabah, in order to magala the reshimo, the or ein sof has to be instalik, right? Has to be nisalim, as he'll explain. Shezeu hefresh ben hakal reshimo, the kav uchinas gilui. Reshimo b'chinas helem. The whole purpose of the kav is to bring a giloy of or, and the whole purpose of the reshimo is to bring a helem of the or, right? To bring about the inyan of helem, and therefore to bring about the inyan of keilim. Imkein ve'imkein mashen nimshach min reshimo, and therefore that which is drawn from the reshimo. In other words, the keilim. Hisabos keilim harazeh b'chinas helem. It's also in a state of Helem. Why? Because the whole inyan of the Rishimo is Helem. It's to be Malim Noir. And therefore, it's Koach HaGvul. It detracts, so to speak, from the Koach HaBli Gvul of the Or. The Or HaBli Gvul has to be removed in order for the Koach HaGvul to be Mizgala. Therefore, in a sense, detracts from the, in order for it to be Mizgala, that detracts from the inyan of Bli Gvul. Therefore, it's Bechinas Helem. Ha're'en is Havu, Shebechinas Kiruv, and therefore the Havu is not in a way of closeness one to the other. Closeness one to the other would be like in a Shalshelet, like in Seder Ishtolshelus, when the bottom madrega of the top link in the chain is attached to the top madrega and then in the link below. So there is a connection between these two things. Masha Enkain over here, we're not talking about Bechinas Kiruv, we're talking about Bechinas Richuk. There's Ba'ein Aroch one to the other. Okay, so we'll have to explain this. The concept is as follows. The Hina Yadua, as we well know, the Zayin Shemesh and Nichakim and Be'eses Firois. The 7 names which are not, which one is not allowed to erase. I'll come back to you in a minute. The 7 Shemois which are not allowed to be erased are associated with the Eses Firois. Now, let's just step back a little bit over here. Moshe Rabbeinu wants to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name. So he asks him, when this is at the Hasneh Bo'er V'Einenu Kalate, the burning bush, and Hashem wants to send it to Mitzrayim, and he has to go back to Mitzrayim and tell Bnei Israel that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to redeem them from Egypt and take them out of Egypt and take them to Eretz Yisrael. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, well, you're going to send me as a shaliach to Bnei Israel. I have to say, who sent me, right? I'm the shaliach. Who's the mishaliach? Like, what's your name? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu answers him, and he says, Shmi ata roitze, or different midrashim, ata roitze, ata mevakesh, leida. My name you want to know? My name you seek to know? Lefi ma'asai ani yekra. According to my deeds, I am called. Shem kel b'chesed, Shem elokim b'gvura, and so on. The different names have to do with different pu'ulos, different activities. And he's going to explain what this means shortly. So those 7 shemois that one may not erase, in other words, the 7 shemois that are shemos of Kedusha, those attached to the 10 spheroids. How do they attach to the 10 spheroids? There's only 7 names, so it goes like this. There's the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, but the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei contains within it the name Yud-Kei. So the name Yud-Kei is actually the name of Chochmah, right? That's the name that's associated with the sphere of Chochmah. And then there's a name associated. There's a name associated with the sphere of Keser as well, which is Ekia, right? Ekia Asher Ekia. That's Keser. Then there's Yud-Kei is associated with Chochmah, and then there's 2 shittas in this. Either Elokah is Bina, or Elokim, or Shem Havaya, with the Nakudos of Shem Elokim. Shem Havaya with the Nakudos of Shem Elokim. There's 2 shittas. Bina, and then Chesed is Kel, Shem Elokim B'Gvura, and then Shem Havaya B'Tiferes, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei B'Tiferes, and then Havaya Tzvakois in Netzach, Elokim Tzvakois in Hoid, Shin Daled Yud in Malchus, in Yesod, and then Aleph Daled Nun Yud in Malchus. Those are the Shemois She'ein and Nichakim. But you see that there's 10 Shemois, but there's really only 7 She'ein and Nichakim because they mix together, like Hashem Tzvaois and Elokim Tzvaois, and Havaya Benikud Elokim, and then Havaya not Benikud Elokim, Havaya Benikud Elokim in Bina, Havaya not Benikud Elokim in Tiferes, and so on. And then Yud-Kei is only part of the name of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, and so on and so forth. In any event, Mekubalim figure out how the 7 Shemois divide into the 10 spheres. So that's what he repeats over here: Shem Kel Chesed, Shem Elokim B'Gvura, etc. All right, keilim the esespheros. These names are associated with the keilim of the 10 spheros, not with the oil of the 10 spheros, with the keilim of the 10 spheros. Why so? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu, "Lefi ma'asai ani ekra." According to the Maisa, I am called. What's in the Maisa? The in of the Maisa is the keilim. The keilim come about within the Maisa. Masha Einken, the in of Gilui with in of oil. That's not the Shemoy She'en Chakim. That's not these 7 Shemoys, these 7 names. So again, he's explaining how does it between his keilim the esesphere Shem kel b'kli hachesed, the kel who loshen gedula, v'gam loshen toikef. So there's 2 inyonim in the name kel, like in Elei Haaretz, the chazakim of the land, the giborim, the heroes of the land, are called Elei Haaretz. So we see that as loshen toikef. And also, L'cha Hashem HaGedula, HaGedula v'HaGvura. Gvura, HaGedula is Kel, is Hashem Kel, right? L'cha Hashem HaGedula, for the sphere of Chesed. And since Kel is associated with Chesed, it's in Gedula. So Kel is Loshen Gedula. And V'gam Loshen Toikef, as I said, Eilei Haaretz. V'hainu Toikef HaHashpor. So what is the sphere of Chesed? Toikef HaHashpor, the power of the Hashpor, that it comes out, but Ribu Hashpor, tremendous amount of Hashpor. Kamosha Kaza Paradise, that's from the Ramak, Shezeu Shaykh B'Kli HaChesed. That Inyan of Hashpor is Shaykh in Kli HaChesed, not in Kli HaGvura, obviously. The Inyan of Chesed is the Inyan of Hashpor. Shu B'chinas Chesed Mamash. V'sham Shaykh in HaGdula V'Atoikef HaHashpor, and over there you have the Inyan of Toikef HaHashpor. In the Kli of Gvura, Elokim, you have the Inyan of Toikef withholding, right? To withhold the oil. It's a different kind of Indian altogether. But it's not shaykh in the oil, it's shaykh in the keilim. This was actually P that it was implicit in the writings of earlier Mekubalim. This is actually an Indian that was emphasized by the Baal Shem Tov more than anybody else. That the Shemois are shaykh to the oil of the Kli itself, not the or in the Kli, but the oil of the Kli. In other words, because the keilim themselves have a certain koyach, they must exist. What causes them to exist? The oil within the Kli itself, in the walls of the Kli, so to speak. Those are the Shemois. You can see more about this in Derech Mitzvah Secha and Mitzvah Shorish Tefillah, Shorish Mitzvah Tefillah. V'chein Shem Elokim hu b'chinas hadin. It's b'chinas Kli HaGvura. That's the Kli, and not the or in the Kli, but the Kli itself. Ach ma she'Hashem ezehem b'keilim, ein ze ba'keilim atzman, shahare Hashemois lahabori yisborach. What he means to say is, we're not talking about the, so to speak, the chomer of the Kli, the physicality of the Kli. We're not talking about. That's not where the shame of the Kli is associated. It's associated with the oil of the chomer. In other words, like the neshama within the guf of the Kli, but not the oil itself, right? It's the nefesh and the guf, so to speak. All right, let's go a little bit further. I'll try and answer your question soon. El hakavona, el ha'or v'hachayus shel hakli. The intention is the or and the chayus of the kli itself, not the chomer of the kli, not the light that the kli contains, but the light within the walls of the kli. Those are the shemois she'enam nimchakim. And we see this, in fact, in Sofrus. What is it that's not nimchak? It's the oisius of the shemois that you're not allowed to erase. It's the letters themselves of the shemois. Now, the letters themselves, let's say the letter Yud, or the letter Hey, or the letter Vav, they don't have Kedusha to an extent that you're not allowed to erase them. They only have Kedusha when they're part of a Shem. Yud Kei Vav Kei, or Aleph Lamed, or whatever. Then you're not allowed to erase them. So we see from that when the letters are together in a certain tziruf, Yud Kei Vav Kei, Aleph Lamed, Yud Mem, that's when they have Kedusha. It's not the Kli itself, but it's the or within the Kli. In other words, the or that's brought down by that tziruf of Oisius, that's the shame that's in the Kli, in the wall of the Kli, so to speak. Okay, he says it in a slightly different lashon now. V'hu chayus shel hakli atzmo. This is the chayus of the Kli itself. In other words, were it not for that oil within the actual Kli, within the, we can't call it a physical Kli, but within the actual Kli, if it were not for that, the Kli wouldn't have any chayus at all. It would be a toita Kli. That probably wouldn't exist, actually. In any event, v'hu chayus shel hakli atzmo lavad. Lavad ha'ora melushma, excluding the or which is melubish in the kli. The or melubish in the kli is already another thing. The or that's melubish in the kli is actually Shem Havaya in one form or another. It's either Shem Havaya b'milui Yudin, or b'milui Hayin, or b'milui Alfin, or b'milui combination, and so on and so forth. Absag Maban. Right? But we'll see about that somewhat later. This is you can check it out over there in the Torah. In any event, the chayus from the kli is that's where it gets its chayus from. That's where it comes. It comes from the rishimo. Now I'll be able to answer your question. Can we say that the line is measured? That's the kav, and the impression left, that's the rishimo, is still the quality of the original oil. It has somewhat or something of the original koyach gvul in it. It has the yecholes laha'ir b'midu gvul. So yeah, I suppose you could say that in some sense. Yeah, it's an impression of the original or. You would have to say that, yeah, because a rishimu min or, exactly, right? It's a rosh min or. That's correct. V'achai shel keilim atzman hen min rishimu. V'zeh inyan hashemois. This is the inyan of the 7 shemois. Kel, Elokim, etc., etc. They are drawing their koyach down from the rishimo, lahavas alachios keilim, to bring about, and to bring about, in other words, to create the keilim, and lahachios keilim, to give them chayus. In other words, their continued existence comes about through the shemos that are drawn from the rishimo, from the oisius of the rishimo. So we see that the rishimo is, in fact, a very, very important concept. And as I had mentioned before, in several times, I think, the whole concept of the rishimo is not really mentioned very much in the writings of Rabbi Chaim Vital at all. Mashma, that he wasn't there for those shiurim. He still had not become a Talmud of the Arizal. When the Arizal moved to Tzfas, Rabbi Chaim Vital was already living there. And the Arizal came from Alexandria, Mitzrayim. He came from Egypt, and he came to Tzfas. And Rabbi Chaim Vital was considerably older than the Arizal. Arizal was a very young man. And he was, his attitude initially, I mean, I don't want to say it exactly like this, but he's sort of like, who's this little, whippersnapper over here? He wasn't very interested in who the Arizal was or what he was all about. So he, for the first period of time that the Arizal was in Tzfas, he paid no attention. Rabbi Chaim Vital paid no attention to him. He's one of the great Mekubalim there. And he paid no attention to this young Tutzik. But he got to hear about his teachings, and then he was nidbak to the Arizal and became his Talmud Muvak. But prior to this, there were other Talmudim of the Arizal, amongst them Rabbi Yisrael Sarug, and then a Talmud of Rabbi Yisrael Sarug was the Emek HaMelech, Naftali Bachrach, I think his name was, Naftali Bachrach. And they wrote extensively on the inyan of the Rishimo, particularly Emek HaMelech, Rabbi Naftali Bachrach, who was a European Mekubal. So he wrote on that quite extensively. But Rabbi Chaim Vital did not want to write on it since he didn't receive these inyanim from the Arizal himself. But the Ikar Gilui of the inyanim of the Rishimo are actually Chassidus Chabad. As far as I'm aware, I don't think any of the other Hasidises, even Komarna, talk very much about the Rishimo. But the Rebbe Maharash was the one that really, and this from the Alter Rebbe as well, but the Rebbe Maharash spoke a lot about it in the Hemsheichim Yoin Nasi Tafresh Mem. He speaks about the Indian Rishimo at great length and lays down a number of very, very important details. As you can see, if you ever have get your hands on a Mishnah's Chabad, which I wrote a few years ago, encyclopedia of Hasidus. I have some copies if you want one. So these elicitations of ore, these drawing downs of ore from the Rishimo, and they themselves are not the inyan of Giloy or Adarabah, they're the inyan of keilim. They're the inyan of what contains the oil, what limits the oil. So it's they're not bechinas Giloy or hanu bechinas kiruv dveikus b'mekoyram. The keilim are not bechinas dveikus to the Rishimo like the or hakav is doveik to the or Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum. The kav is bechinas dveikus. Why? Because the kav is compared to the ray of the sun. You can't divide between the ray of the sun and still have the two of them. If you divide between the ray of the sun, the ray will just disappear, right? It might take some time, practically speaking, in a Gashmistic sense, but it will disappear. And therefore, the ray of the sun and the sun is not the same relationship as the keilim from the Rishimo. The kav from the Or Ein Sof is bebechinas dveikus, even though it's not all of the Or Ein Sof. It's nevertheless a gilui of the Or Ein Sof. Why is the kav a gilui if it is measured? Well, even a nitzotz, a spark of or is still or, and a spark is for sure severed completely from its source, and otherwise it wouldn't be a spark. But it's still the inyan of or. The kav is not severed from its or. It's a gilui. But it's a gilui which is limited. In other words, it comes down in such a way that it's not as powerful as it was before, because that was the whole purpose of the Tzimtzum, was to make sure that the oil of the kav would not overwhelm the keilim and bust them apart like it did in Olam HaToyu. So it's a gilui. In any event. So the Rishim was not bebechinas dveikus b'mekoyram, kim bebechinas helem. The makor of the keilim, i.e. the Rishimo, is not felt by the keilim, which is why we have difficulty with the inyan of dveikus. Why it's so difficult to come to the true inyan of dveikus, because when you put on, let's say, put on tefillin, or you do a mitzvah which is requires a physical object, which always goes back ultimately to the Rishimo. It's difficult to feel in this, and one has to really work on it to be able to feel an inyan of elokus in what you're doing. You have to work on it. It's not something you feel automatically. With the sunlight coming through the window, you know that there's a sun there, because otherwise it'd be a cloudy day, and if the sun disappeared completely from the thing, then there wouldn't be any sunlight either. So you know that the sunlight is davuk to its original source, Masha Ein Kain, and you can feel it, you can see it, you can trace it all the way back, Masha Ein Kain, with the inyan of the keilim that come from a bechina of helem, which is the inyan of the Rishimo. Therefore, the keilim themselves are the inyan of helem. Kamaimer, as it says, kant antistalik minayhu. When you would go out of the keilim, in other words, if the oil would leave the kli, ishta'aru kegufa belo nishmasa. There would be like a goof without an neshama. Toit. A goof without an neshama is a corpse. They would be like corpses. All right. Haregam sheyesh behem bechinas hachayus mitzad atzmam, even though they have chayus on their own. In other words, they exist as keilim, and their existence is the oil within the wall of the kli itself, within the walls of the kli. They have chayus mitzad atzmam. Haim bechinas hakoychos meharashimo, the koyach that come from the shimo or the shemois, as we explained before. Mikol makom ishtaru kagufa below nishmasa. Nevertheless, they will be like a dead. They'll be like a dead body when the oil in the kli. That's not the ore of the kli, but the ore in the kli, right? If that ore is nistalik, the ore that the kli contains is nistalik. If it leaves, then they'll be like a dead body. Yes, the keilim will still exist, but they'll be dead. They won't have the neshama within. They won't have the chayus. They won't have the ore and the chayus within the kli. They'll only have the maintenance of the kli by the shame that gives it its chayus. So mikol makom ishtaruk gufa bebechinas helema or vagilu chulut. Kumosh kazu macher. There's another mimer. I'm not sure which mimer it is that the Rebbe Rasham talks about this, but obviously there is another mimer, or more than one mimer that deals with this. That deals with this issue. What's drawn into the keilim from the reshimo is not, as we said before, the aspect of veikus. The or is davik to the maor. The chayus hakli is not davuk to the reshimo. It's not b'chinas veikus the mekayram. Mekayram had b'chinas kiruv. It's not in the state of kiruv. Lios b'chinas giloy or kim b'chinas elim. Other rabbits are exact opposite of Giloy or it's in of Helema or. The Reshimo B'chinas Koach Ne'elam. The Reshimo is it's a koyach, but the origin of which is not visible. It's a koyach ne'elam. And it's a koyach to make helam as well. It's a koyach which is ne'elam, and it's a koyach to make helam, as we've explained. Why? Because it's not b'chinas dveikus to its makor. Therefore, you can't. It's ne'elam, and the makor is ne'elam. And therefore, drawing whatever is drawn down from the reshima is also b'chinas helam. Similarly, with the keilim coming into actuality, when the keilim are we're talking about just directly from the reshima. In other words, the koach hagvul of the reshima. So that is manifested in very high madrigas in Ak and so on, but they're not mamish keilim b'poil. But here, when we talk about the inyan of keilim b'poil, the inyan of keilim b'poil cannot just come about through the reshimo. It also needs an inyan of oiros, as we'll explain. Shuhu aladeha oiros kanal. This has to be by way of the oiros, as we explained previously. Periches sha'oru b'chinas giloy. In other words, in order to have the keili b'chinas giloy, there has to be an inyan of or as well. Now, how does that happen? He's going to explain. Hina isba it's chayim. That comes about with what's called the or yoshan or choizer. Or yoshan milamata lamata. That's the or kav. And then you have the inner or choizer milamata lamayla. Sidri v'dach. Very nice. Thank you. You must have I think you mentioned to me that you have the muga, not the muga, the sourced version of Ayin Beis, which is a new print. Yeah, I have to get that at some point in time. Thank you. Very good. So again, it says in Eitz Chaim, you have two different kinds of oil. You have the oil that goes milamala, that comes milamala lamata, and then you have that's called the or yoshor, and then you have the inner or choizer milamata lamayla. When those two oiros clash together, so to speak, that brings about a new oil. He's going to give an example of this, a moshel for this inyan of or yosher and or choizer, but that's how the keilim come about. When the or yosher and or choizer clash together, and then they give up sparks, right? Those sparks are separated from the or hakav, and that becomes the inyan of keilim. It's an or that becomes separate. That's in the Rishimu. He'll explain this as we go a little bit further. So again, the or yoshin or choizer shemakim zebazeh. They beat against one another, so to speak. That when the two oiros beat against each other, so to speak, they knock into each other, then oisias fall from them. Shemehem is having keilim. This is obviously not meant to be taken literally. But the oisias, I'll explain later, that's the inyan of that's in like nitzutzos, which are coming out of. Anyway, let's look at the emotional way he explains it. So again, that from this the keilim come to existence. It's like two opposite shittas in a Gemara. There's two chachomim, and they're arguing about a certain point, and they're in disagreement. And one has one perspective, and the other one has a different perspective, and they argue backwards and forwards, and therefore, eventually, one of the opinions, or both of the opinions, get modified. Usually, it's the way it works, is one opinion gets modified by the other. In other words, let's say a person made a certain blanket statement about some halachic issue. Let's hagolas keilim, for example, right? He made some kind of issue about hagolas keilim. Some kind of statement like hagolas keilim. It's kashering keilim for to make them kosher to eat from. But he made a blanket statement. Along comes someone, he's maksha, and he said, no, but we see in a different place that it doesn't say that this is necessary. So then he'll start to modify his shita. His shita is modified in the sense that, well, it doesn't apply to a kli that wasn't used for boiling water or for hot food. It only applies to kli. I'm sorry, it doesn't apply to kli that was used for cold food. It only applies to kli that was used for hot food. That requires hagola, right? Or it doesn't apply to ceramic keilim because ceramic keilim cannot be kashered by hagola. They cannot be kashered by hagola. So it has to be smashed, and that's its takona. There's no other way of dealing with it. You can reconstitute it later on. You can take the clay again and make it into a different clay, but it has to be smashed first, right? It can't be, Hagolas keilim doesn't work over there. So we can see that one opinion becomes modified by the other one. That's the inyan of Or Yosher and Or Chayzer. So I'll explain. That two people are sitting and learning, and they're arguing in halacha. They're asking questions against each other. Yeah, kasha. So then what happens? Comes out a new svara, a new way of looking at things. That it wasn't in their minds initially. They didn't think about it there. That is the inyan of a kli. That's a new inyan. It's a new kli. It's a kli. Why? It wasn't there before. It wasn't there as the or haseichel. In other words, in my svara, that didn't exist. And it certainly didn't exist in your svara. But now, through the questions that you asked me and through the difficulties that you put up in my explanation and so on, I have to look at it from a different perspective, new point of view. That new point of view is the inyan of a kli. That's a new kli. V'hainu, from the kushiyas the questions that one asks against the other, he contradicts the other guy's opinion, he contradicts the first guy's opinion. He has to bring out new explanations in order to justify his previous explanation, his previous thought. And when he has to justify it, he has to modify it. Because it comes about by way of stira as a bitul sichloi, it's a contradiction to his way of thinking. The person who was asking the question didn't just ask a question, but he showed him the incorrectness of his svara, that how could it possibly apply in such and such a case? How could that halacha possibly apply in such and such a case? And he said, no, actually, it doesn't apply over there. It only applies over here, and whatever. So it's a stira and a bittul of sichlo is svarasoy, of his seichel and his svara, his original way of thinking about it. And therefore, haru svara katana be'erech etzma soga shenimshcha tchila. Therefore, it's sort of a more narrow application of his original svara than was originally. He has to narrow it down. It's smaller than the original thought, than the original idea. Because if his friend did not contradict his position, he wouldn't have come to this news for him. It only came from the steer, from the contradiction. And therefore, it's on a lower madreg, it's a svara katana. It's a more limited svara than it was previously. Previously, it was much more blanket svara. You can do hagolas keilim on any kli. Then he finds out, well, not actually any kli, but only a kli that was used for hot. Initially, do you have to do hagola, and not every kli, but only metal keilim and glass keilim, but not ceramic keilim, and so on and so forth. And so they go through this whole process of kasha and teret. If a contradiction had not been presented, this is a misprint here. He wouldn't have come to a new thing. Oh, I see. Yeah, it would have been. It's now a smaller thing. It's more limited. Had he been able to come from the original hasoga to a new hasoga, it would have been on the same level because it wouldn't have had to be limited by the number of cases where it applies, and therefore it would have been on the same scale as the previous hasoga. But a thought, an idea, a concept that comes about by way of a contradiction, by way of kashas, when the filas hasoga soy and initially he doesn't know the answer, he has to search around for an answer. Hasoga katana be'erech, it's on a much smaller madrega. And that's also obviously in another mimer somewhere else that the Rebbe Rashabi is talking about. So, what does all this have to do in the moshel with our nimshal, which is the keilim? So explain. Exactly the same thing happens in the creation of the keilim. Through the Or Yosh and the Or Choizer banging into each other, they contradict each other, so to speak. Right? Yeah, good. They contradict each other, so to speak. Therefore, noiflim oisius, and therefore the oisius fall down from there. That is like the concept of the hasoga, which in halacha, which fell from its level because now it has to be limited only to certain cases. It's a limitation that was placed on it, and therefore it's a smaller hasoga, so to speak. Mizen is havu keilim, and this is how the keilim come about. The same thing through the stira, the contradiction between the Or Yosher and the Choizer, they're banging to each other. In other words, there are two different approaches to things. The Or Yosher and the Or Choizer, milamala lamata, milamata lamaila. Then is havu keilim. From this comes about the Indian of keilim. More hasoga katana, just like a smaller hasoga comes from an original hasoga after an argument and a contradiction. It comes about through his level of his thought process falling down to a lower level because it now has to be more limited than it was originally. It's not the same as the original thought. It doesn't apply to all the cases that he originally thought it would apply to. And therefore it turns out that creating the keilim from the oireis, it's not in a manner of kiruv. The letters fall down, so to speak. In other words, again, it's a reduction, and it comes about by way of being whittled down. Right? That places a distance between the previous machshava and the later one. So the letters within the light itself are a thickening of the light. In other words, it's not the same madrega of light that creates the letters as is that actually illuminates. It's true that the oiris and the oasis themselves come about through the inyan of oir, his abu sa'or, the thickening of the light, the congealing, so to speak, of the light into letters. Nevertheless, that his abu sa'or is a pu'ula. It's a result of the effect. It's an effect from the Rishimo, as he goes on to say. This itself, this his abu sa'or, this thickening of the light. In other words, this coarsening of the light and this limitation of the light. It doesn't shine everywhere now. It's limited now. That's a result of the Rishimo. And this goes back to what we said before. As we said before, it's a posuk in Eof, in Job, and it's not presented as a a statement is presented there as a question. Where does Chochmah come from? But the way it's always learned in Kabbalah and in Hasidus is that it's said as a statement. In other words, the pnimius of this inyan is that it's not a question, it's a statement. Chochmah comes from Ayin. What's Ayin? Ayin is from a Madrega of Ba'en Aroch. It's from a Madrega which is not Bekiruv, it's not close to the Yesh, the Chochmah, Reishis Agilui. It's far away, it's with Bechinas Helem. And therefore, it's called Yesh Mi'ayin. So, not the Or of Chochmah, the Kli of Chochmah, the Yisavuz of Bechinas En Aroch. It's like Yesh Mi'ayin. It's not Mamish Yesh Mi'ayin because you can't say that Chochmah is an inyan of Yesh. Chochmah is an inyan of Bittul Chochmah. So you can't really say that it's Yesh Mi'ayin, but nevertheless it's Mi'ayin. Chochmah Mi'ayin Timotzeh. So too, the same rule applies in all, as regards all of the keilim v'olim ha'atzilus. Okay, so we just learned now in Perek Tes. Zeo she'atzilus hu ba'en aroch hainu ha'keilim d'zavus on the tzimtum. The keilim of atzilus are b'bechinas ein aroch. That's what ba'en aroch to the Or Ein Sof. And because they're coming back by way of a tzimtum. And even the chayus that's in the keilim, in other words, the shemois that are in the keilim of the spheres themselves, they're mishor sham, they're shorish to the reshimo. Either the 7 shemosh and michakim, not allowed to erase. It comes from a very far distance, right? Because it comes about by way of Helem. And therefore they're like a goof without a neshama. Looks dead. And also the creation, if we look a little bit more into it, it has to come about by way of or somehow or another, because from Heder, which is the inyan of the Reshimo, from Heder you don't get a Metzius. So in order for there to be a Metzius, there also has to be the Begias or Yoshua or Chayz, or Yoshua or Chayz have to clash. Shenoifim Oisis is causes letters to fall down to a lower Madrega. Nisbaya Moshel al Zeh, and the Moshel for it would be two Talmud Chachomim arguing and being makshim one on the other. When the Fila who begins Vichuk and the letters fall from there, in other words, the case of the that he was talking about now becomes much more limited than it was originally, and that's the aspect of Richuk. I don't know that we're going to be able to get that far today. Right, who's game to start the next? Because it's already an hour. Who's game to start the next parak, or should we just leave it till next week? Try to do 2 prokim next week, or maybe I can record a parak before I leave and just put it online. Probably that would be the best thing. Okay, so I think we'll just leave it now. I don't think we'll finish this parak. It's too long of a parak. It goes all the way through to here. It's not such a long parak, but then we leave out part of it in the middle. But what does everyone feel? Any particular? Should we leave it? Yeah? Everyone sleeping? All right. So I think we'll leave it till next week, and if necessary, I will finish with the mimer by putting it online. Okay. I'll just record and put it online if necessary. Okay. All right. So good evening, everybody. Have a a great Rosh Chodesh Av on Wednesday, and see you later next Sunday, which is Arizal's Yortzeit. Yes, you can call me about the hair. Yeah. Can we get your book? Yeah, you can. I think I have a few copies over here. I'm pretty sure. I mean, it sells in the store for $20 if you're interested, and a few dollars for shipping. But If you want, we can get it. It should be in the Kahos store, but until you get it from them, probably quicker to get it from me. You just get it from me. If you just send me an email and then give me your address, I'll arrange it. Yeah, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. I'll tell you how much and whatever. It's just shipping. I don't know, $3.99 or whatever for shipping, and so $24 for the safer. All right. All righty. Okay, folks. See you all. See you all next week. If anyone is interested, by the way, I'm going to be giving a Zoom class 10 o'clock Central Time Sunday morning for somebody asked me to give it with the excuse of her husband who's not well. And since it's a results your time, it's a special time. So if anyone's interested, let me know and I will send you the link for the Sunday morning class. All right, just send me an email, otherwise I'll just forget. I'll forget to send it to you. All right. Batzloch, everybody, and